Some of us have had long struggles, and we've had to find many ways to survive. It is a testimony to the people we have around who can support us, but also the inner strength we each have within.
I would like to welcome Robert to the stage, a storyteller who has a very important story to tell us about the long haul and getting through it.
Well, my grandmother, my mother's mother, had a really serious problem with depression for most of her life. When I was 7 years old, a really terrible incident happened in my grandmother's life, and as a result, she spent 3 years in a state hospital in Ionia, Michigan. It wasn't until years later that I found out what actually happened. All I knew is that my grandparents disappeared from my life, and we never visited them again. My father also had two aunts who were bipolar. I have several cousins and nephews and nieces who also have depression, so there's a lot of mental health issues on both sides of my family. When I was 19, I was going to college and living in a dorm. I started to feel depressed for the first time. I wasn't sure why, but all I could tell was that my usual activities, I wasn't getting the same enjoyment out of them, and the only thing I was looking forward to were meal times. I also started taking 2 or 3 hour showers every day because the warm water was the only thing that made me feel good. At Christmas break, I went home and told my mother how I was feeling. She immediately went white in the face and couldn't speak. I now know that she was terrified that I was beginning to have the same problems as her mother, and she had no idea what to say or do. But she did something right then that set my mental health journey back about 20 years. She told me to talk to my dad. Well, my father belonged to the Mensa Society, which is an organization for people with really high IQs. But my dad's emotional IQ was just about non-existent, or at least it seemed that way to me. He was physically and verbally and emotionally abusive to my mother, and I'd begged my mother for years to leave him. But I went and talked to him anyway, told him my problem. He was reading the newspaper, and he lowered it and he listened. When I was done talking, he asked me if I was doing drugs. I told him I'd tried pot a few times and that was it. He said, well, that's your problem. And you'd be a damn fool to do it again, and whipped the newspaper back up. And that was it. That was the end of the conversation. Well, I was and am an introvert. So after this dead end with my parents, it never occurred to me to seek help on my own, and I began to self-medicate. This continued through my 20s and into my early 30s, and it was an absolute miracle that I survived it all. Finally, at the age of about 33, sick, really underweight, and severely depressed, I sought help from a community mental health service in Denver, Colorado. These wonderful people set me up with counseling, started me on antidepressants, and absolutely saved my life. It'd be nice to say that this is the end of the story, but depression is a sneaky illness. Counseling and meds are a big help, but really they just treat the symptoms. When I was about 40 years old, an event happened that I don't even remember. But after 20 years of being depressed, all it took was this one small incident to make it feel like it was the last straw. I felt like I couldn't even take one more day, and I swallowed a bottle of pills. As I lay back on the bed, I thought, well, it's going to be finally over. I'm so tired of feeling depressed every single day, and never lets up. Then as the pills began to work, and I began to feel like I might pass out, I thought, what are you doing? Are you really ready to die? And I thought, I don't think I'm ready to exit this world. And I called an ambulance. I somehow made it to the phone. Well, they took me months to the hospital, and they pumped my stomach, put me on the psych ward for 10 days. And when I got out, I went to more counseling, this time with the Grand Traverse Community Mental Health. Well, 2 years after that, I developed cancer. So I had lots of tumors, lots of chemo. But 6 months later, and that was gone. I was really lucky. About a year after that, I met an actual amazing woman and her son, and I fell in love. We got married, and I adopted her wonderful son. We've been together now for 27 years and counting. My wife has had to put up with a lot. A depressed person is not easy to live with. And then 6 years ago, I developed left temporal lobe epilepsy, and it made my depression probably twice as bad. My antidepressants, they don't work anymore, and the occasional breaks that I used to experience from my depression have disappeared completely. So recently, I've undergone ketamine infusions in an experimental method of depression therapy. They kind of work, but they didn't work for very long. But if there's one thing I take away from this whole experience, it's that you can't give up. So, now at the age of 73, about 55 years after the first time that I felt depressed, my old companion is still here. But I've got several tools in my toolbox that help me cope. I exercise regularly. I practice gratitude because it's really important to be thankful for the positive things in my life. It sounds cliche, but I know that my life could be infinitely worse. I have an amazing group of friends and family, and I've been blessed with a creative brain that brings me great joy when I let it. But even with the knowledge that I have and the positive practices that I maintain, I'm still susceptible to spells of depression, and they can take on a dangerous undertone. As recently as last year, I was walking on the pier in Frankfort in the winter. I'd been feeling depressed for some time. The cold gray skies and icy water of a Michigan winter are always a challenge. As I stood on the pier that February day, I thought, one step, that's all it'd take. With all these clothes on, I'd sink like a rock. One step and it'll be over. One step into that lake and this pain would be gone. But I thought, that's the danger of depressive thinking. The temptation to end your physical life, to end that psychic pain. But then I thought, what if you hadn't called the ambulance 32 years ago? You'd have never met your wife and that wonderful boy who you've watched grow into such a special young man, or met all the amazing people in this community. I gave that cold, dark water one more look, and I turned and walked back to the car and drove home. Do I wish my parents had reacted differently all those years ago? Sure I do. But they had no skills to handle the situation. Mental health issues are something that should be talked about. Hiding from them or ignoring them is a recipe for disaster. If you see a loved one struggling, please have the courage and compassion to talk about it. With the avalanche of suicides in this country, you could literally be saving a life.
Robert Friske. Robert, thank you.